Okay, and also I'll apologize for the number of handouts. As I explained earlier, I really expected about 15 or so people. Didn't expect a crowd nearly this large, so unfortunately are going to have to share in order to follow along. This also point out that what I'm presenting on tonight is really from 2015. It's a little bit too close to the end of 2016 to be able to. For 2015 is what I'll call a generalized budget. So it represents including to the best of our ability all of the different federal budgets that we have to deal with over the course of the year and presenting it as a single year's budget. But you all need to keep in mind that that's a little bit, takes a little bit of creativity to do that. So that as you look further and further into the details, some things might not be totally accurate for specifically 2015. But at the level that we're looking at it tonight, say the 10,000-foot level, looking down at the Bureau, not dissecting deeply into any of the division budgets, it's accurate. So the first slide, the first slide in your handouts talks about the expenditures that we make within the Bureau of Natural Resources and identifies them by division. And as Pete mentioned, two of these divisions, inland fisheries and marine fisheries, have just recently, like within the weeks, the last couple of weeks, been merged. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as you can see, overall, we spend about $24 million per year on natural resource programs in the state of Connecticut. That includes, you'll see right underneath the title slide, that includes not only the monies that we spend within DEEP, but it also includes about $7 million in fringe benefit costs for our state employees that are actually not in our budget, but are in the comptroller's budget. But if you include those in, because it's a real cost to the state, $24 million per year is our overall budget level. And that's been reduced a little bit for 2016 and probably will further for 2017. And I'll circle back to that later. So what this slide shows is really how that $24 million in budget expense is divvied up amongst the different divisions within DEP. And then if you look at the bottom, beneath the pie chart, you can see it in numeric, see the actual numbers for 2015. Next slide. So we just looked at what we spend and how it's divided out amongst the various divisions. Now what this slide shows is where that money comes from, currently comes from. And you'll notice that in the upper right-hand corner, there's two pieces of that pie that are sort of exploded out of it slightly. And they're titled General Fund, that's what GF stands for, Appropriation for Fringe Costs, and then Additional General Fund Appropriation, 9%. That exploded piece of the pie represents the amount of money above and beyond our revenue that we take from the general fund. I'll go into that in a little bit greater detail. But that, in essence, that piece of the pie is support that the state puts towards natural resource programs that doesn't come from any of our sources of revenue and is, in fact, above and beyond all of the money that sportsmen put into the system, contribute to the system. So now let's look at the rest of that pie chart. You look at the bottom part and it says sportsmen's licenses, 29%. That's the total amount of money that anglers and hunters spend on licenses, permits, stamps, fees that are collected in any given year. And that accounts for, if you compare it to what we spend, about 29–30% of our total budget. Look to the left a little further and you'll see federal wildlife restoration. That's wildlife restoration monies coming from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through grants to a trust fund. Above that is sport fish restoration money. That's a sister program, sport fish restoration, same thing. It's money that comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through a trust fund. Combined, that represents roughly another 30% of our overall budget. Now that trust fund is monies that ultimately come from anglers and hunters. It's monies that each of you, when you purchase a piece of equipment, pay a excise tax on, called a Pittman-Robertson tax if it's a piece of hunting equipment, or a Wallabro or DJ tax if it's a piece of fishing equipment. And that money goes into and is collected by the federal government, it's put into a trust fund. It's an off-budget item, and it's available and proportionately out to the states for fish and wildlife restoration. And it's available to the states proportional to the number of sportsmen in that state, their land area, et cetera. There's a formula that actually determines it. So if you look at those three pieces of the pie, the blue one, sportsmen's licenses, the orange one, federal wildlife restoration, and the gray one, federal sport fish restoration, that amounts to the total amount of funds that anglers and hunters in Connecticut contribute towards their sport each year. And it's all, you'll notice it's only a piece of the pie. Roughly, it's in the neighborhood of 60% when it's all taken in total. And there's some detail I'll get into in a bit as well. But before I do, you'll see there's a lot of other smaller slices of that pie. Federal, state wildlife grants, Forest Service grants, National Marine Fisheries Service. Those represent other sources of revenue, not from sportsmen, but other sources of revenue that's applied towards our budget. So key points from this graph are that there is a chunk, roughly around 30% of our budget that is covered by the general taxpayer, and is above and well above and beyond what sportsmen contribute. And that's one of the things that we hear over and over again when we go to meetings, is that the general fund is skimming money that sportsmen are spending off the top, that sportsmen dollars are going towards who knows what, that the sportsmen are getting ripped off continually, and it's just simply not true. And we've tried through our Angler's Guide and other venues to get this information out to folks, and it's going to be an uphill battle. And I think we'll be long after Pete and my careers are over. There'll still be lots of anglers and hunters who feel that their money is being used elsewhere, when it's simply not the case. And I'll mention one more thing before we move. Two more things before we move off this slide. There is legislation in place at the federal level and at the state level. It's a law called our assent language, and it's a requirement of the federal government that each state, in order to qualify for accepting federal sport fish and wildlife restoration funds, each state has to have a law on the books that guarantees that all of the revenue from hunters and anglers that sportsmen contribute through licenses, et cetera, comes back to the programs, to the natural resource programs of the state. So not only is it a fact in terms of how the money is spent, it's a requirement as per both federal and state law. So anglers and hunters can and should feel very secure that their money is being used for its intended purpose.
Do you want us to save the questions to the end?
I can speed up at any point in time, so I feel more comfortable if you just spit them out when you have them in mind.
This 29% basically for licenses and permits.
Yep.
And as you know, they've been trying to close the hatcheries now. Every 2 years it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was all the hatcheries that they wanted to close.
Yep.
My opinion, okay, and basically this is shared with many of the sportsmen that I know, and actually even some of the teachers, is that if they do close the hatcheries, okay, and there are no longer stocking trout in the state of Connecticut, people will not buy fishing licenses to catch bass or perch or sunfish, okay? So a lot of this 29% will go away if they close the hatcheries. That's my only comment.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
But you do raise a good point that I didn't make. Some people, sportsmen, one of the other questions that people typically have is, if sportsmen are contributing so much money, how can they cut us year after year?
Right.
It's that little exploded piece of the chart. As long as there's a net tax, or there is a taxpayer contribution to our operations, then we are in fact vulnerable, just like any other agency, to having our budget cut
Sure.
in that process.
Sure.
If that pie didn't exist, we wouldn't be so vulnerable.
Can I ask a question on that, though?
Yep.
So, the taxpayer funding represents about 7.2 million.
Yep.
Right. If we're incredibly successful in raising new anglers, getting more license sales, things of that nature, and this blue pie grows, which by result means Pittman, Robinson, Park grows, is there an expectation there'd be a subsequent reduction in the general fund advance, meaning that DEP would remain a $24 million organization even if license sales added another $5 million? We would become a $29 million budget. The general fund reduction would be down to $2.2 million. And it'd be great, you're more self-sufficient, keep
Yep.
going.
Yep.
Is that kind of a fear or a consideration that you all think is potentially possible?
It's a very good question. It's something that I hear over and over again, and in this case, it's a legitimate concern. We would expect, if we raised more money, we would expect net to come out, be more and more self-sufficient. But would there be a tendency on some to look to recoup and redirect state dollars? Probably. And I would not think that the whole thing would be so vulnerable as that 9%, the yellow curve, which amounts to about a little over $2 million now. That would be the area that would likely be vulnerable to redirection. So,
Bill, I had a quick question.
Yep.
I may have misunderstood your comment. You said that about 7 million of the 24 is the cost of fringes for employees that are really not in your group, and that's just about
No.
equal to the white and the yellow. So if you didn't have to pay for their fringes, you wouldn't need the $7 million?
the 7 million is roughly 7 million, it's a little over, is the total amount above and beyond what we cover with various revenue sources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Of that, it's actually about a little over 5 million that is fringe benefit costs. And that's fringe benefit costs for general funded employees that are on our payroll. So it is an expense associated with us. It just, that 5+ million resides in somebody else's budget at this point in time, the comptroller's budget.
Okay, so it's either the case that these folks who you're funding their fringe benefits are working on the Bureau's kinds of projects, or they're working on other stuff, you just happen to carry their costs.
They're working on Bureau stuff.
They are,
They are
okay.
in our Bureau.
Yeah, the optics on that look like you are paying for somebody else.
Think of a general funded person who works at the hatchery growing trout as a maintainer. So he's totally paid for general funds. The only thing that shows up in our DEP budget is his salary. His fringe rate is in the comptroller's budget, but it really is ours.
Yeah, the original impression I had was that you were in your expenses for the Bureau
Yep.
were costs of people who weren't doing work for the Bureau. This, in fact, this picture is all representing the cost and the funding for Bureau work. Okay, so
Absolutely.
it's not, I misunderstood, thank you.
So if
Doug had a question, but if you want to finish that thought.
No,
No, I just,
I'm fine.
I wanted to clarify that the agency pays basically the salary, and then the health insurance and the rest gets paid through the comptroller. So it is,
for our general funded employees,
Yeah.
for our federal funded employees, we pick up the whole tab in-house.
Can you address quickly how your fringe rate compares to the rates of other states and how that impacts your budget?
It is a good point, because this is something that came up in our meeting, and I believe we talked about at the FAC meeting as well. The fringe benefit rates are very, very high, incredibly high, off the charts high. They're at 82%. So if you look at fringe and overhead, it's roughly 100%. So if you're paying a person $50,000, its cost to you is really $100,000 overall. Part of the reason those fringe benefits are so high, and they're much higher than in most all other states, are simply because of costs that have built up over the years, with, you read about it, the delays of payments for years into the pension program causes there to be higher costs now than otherwise would have happened. A variety of other issues. Bottom line is, our costs are very, very high compared to other states. Most of the other states that I talk to, who I can't say that I can compare the benefits and whether they were comparing apples to apples, but presumably they're in a similar ballpark, are talking around 40% benefit rates as opposed to 80, 82% that we're paying. So, and those benefit rates have gone up over time with no change in the benefits. So it is associated to, you know, it is caused by the fact that the costs that were present in the 1990s and early 2000s weren't fully covered at that time. And now we're paying the price. And I think you've all read about this in the newspapers.
Bill, you talked about the federal government requiring this state law. And so, how long has that been in effect?
It's been in effect my entire career.
Why wasn't that information? We all of us feel that we're getting hosed in the sense of our fees being used, going in, you know, getting everything else. If that was common knowledge, in quotes,
Yep.
it never got out to the public, and it's not getting out to the public.
Yep, and I hear you, and I guess we're just gonna have to try to do a better job of getting that word out, and I know that all of you have clubs that you go back to, and I would hope that you would carry this message. We have been telling people this for many, many years. In fact, 2009, 10, 11, there were some changes in the General Assembly when they made some changes to our budget that required us, the feds forced us to actually update the assent language in the statutes to make it compliant with their requirements, given the changes that took place in how our budget worked. And at that point, it was in the newspapers, it was all over, it was a regular thing that we were saying on a day-to-day basis, educating elected officials, anglers and hunters as well, just to try to get that legislation through, which fortunately we were successful in doing.
You know, like those salmon signs you put up?
Yeah.
You need a sign.
And it's
And tack them
interesting.
up on the trees.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of the signs that we do put up do have sport fish restoration on it, but they don't explain the detail that we're talking about.
I think you go a long way if those are off too. I think that Alicia's clarified that, Rick's clarified that in the past, but I think.
I said it, I don't know how many times at chapter meetings.
Absolutely. And
Having been
it's a
involved with
perception
sport fish
versus a
restoration
reality.
as my career.
We put it in the Angler's Guide
you know,
a few times.
It's been.
3 times that since I've been bureau chief, we put it in.
And the only other thing you think of is when you get a license, there's some kind of addendum. If you get it online, there's an addendum in a PDF that says, this is where the money goes.
Maybe we can get Mike Bosheen to develop some kind of sexy graphic, because
There's
Bill's
plenty of room on
absolutely
that
right. It's been in the Angler's Guide every year, but a lot of people don't read text.
Yeah.
They want to see images, they want to see, you know, fancy graphics and interesting stuff. And maybe we can make the points sink in that way. It's a tough sell. We've been trying, but we obviously need to do better.
So we're gonna get attention with a sexy graphic.
Somehow.
I don't want to prolong the discussion, but this is a golden opportunity for TU to be of value to its members. And so if any chapter writes something and puts it in their newsletter or in their website, for heaven's sake, send it to Alicia so it can be broadcast and picked up and plagiarized, if you will, by others, so you can get it out to your chapters. I mean, this is something, we used to have newsletters where presidents would write messages and they tell these things. It's a golden opportunity. We're missing it if we don't pick up on it. So
And we'll certainly work with you and provide you some text.
in the meantime, take it out of the Angler's Guide.
And I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody, the reason why you're here is to take this information back
Yep.
to your chapters. And I'll send out a follow-up email after this meeting. I will include the statute so that if people doubt you, you can show it to them and say, it's law.
The good news is license sales have gone down, so So we're gonna set up a phone bank, and we're each gonna personally call every license holder in Connecticut and let them know 100% of their license. With this many people, well, we could probably do it with just 50 calls tonight for the next couple of weeks.
I think I'd like a volunteer.
Okay, Bill.
Okay. I'm timing myself. I know that if I get too far along, we're gonna get shut down, so. The next,
You're the guest, that doesn't happen.
the next slide is a table. And what, all that does is show the numbers that are in the previous pie chart. And the statute that Alicia referred to is Connecticut General Statutes 26-15A. And that's the assent language. You guys can read through it. Guarantees the money's coming back to BNR. The first line on that table, I'm not going to go through all these, but the first line is the total revenue for sportsman licenses and permits, slightly over $7 million per year. Of that $7 million per year, approximately $4.2 million is due to fishing licenses. That's inland and marine. So think of it as 4.2 fishing, 2.8 hunting for that license revenue roughly. Other point I'll make here is a couple of these revenue numbers are less than they had been in the past. Federal Forest Service, you'll see at $595,000. That, our money available through the Forest Service for our forestry programs has been going down. Used to be between $800,000 and $1 million per year. Now it's down under $600,000, and it's going to slide a little bit further. The other thing is timber revenue, and it's very appropriate in the Connecticut Forest and Parks Association to speak of this. Timber revenue, $244,000 per year. We used to always be north of about $500,000 per year in timber revenue, and sustainably it would be better. It would be better financially in terms of revenue, and it would be much better environmentally if we were bringing in about $1 million per year on timber revenue. Our forests are uniformly too old and mature. We're lacking in early successional habitat for a whole host of species, and it would be much better from a forest health perspective, from a wildlife ecological perspective, if we had a lot more timber harvests in the state of Connecticut than we're currently having.
Can I ask why it's declining then?
It's declining largely because the revenue comes from the timber harvests that take place on our state lands. And it's tied to simply what we're seeing throughout our Bureau and throughout state government. We have less people to be able to do the work necessary to have those harvests. In order to do a successful harvest, you've got to have inventory work done, you've got to have a management plan, and that management plan has to be in detail and presented to the public and the municipalities in which it's going to occur. Otherwise, people will come out of the woodworks to object to a timber harvest.
Why are you cutting my trees then?
They'll go ballistic. Massachusetts can't cut a tree right now. I believe they still are under a restriction because they weren't doing the necessary upfront work with the public to make sure they understood what was going on. So we do that, but it takes an investment of time and staff. And quite frankly, we can't contract it out that work either. Total revenue is short, as a little bit over $7 million from our overall expenditures. Up until 2009, and I mention this because some folks in this room might have a long enough memory to remember this. Up until 2009, our revenue was actually $3 million a year higher, and that additional revenue came from something called unrefunded motorboat fuels taxes. Many people who were very active in Trout Unlimited were instrumental in the mid to late 1990s in getting that money out of the Special Transportation Fund. It's money paid by boaters and anglers. It's around $7 million a year. About $3 million a year was determined to be eligible to, and other states use it for supporting of fishing programs. The group, Trout Unlimited and other angler groups were able to get that money out of the Special Transportation Fund and into our budget. And right up through 2009, we had $3 million per year of those monies that we were able to work with and use to support fishing programs. With the recession that took place in 2008 and the changes in the budget, that money was moved back into the Special Transportation Fund, and that's where it remains today. So we were closer to self-sufficient when that was included. We're a little farther away from it now. But I really wanted to mention that because a lot of you folks might know some of the people that were instrumental in getting that money, particularly folks from the Hammonasset chapter of Trout Unlimited, Thames chapter of Trout Unlimited, and I believe Farmington Valley chapter was around at that point in time, but certainly Steve Lewis and some of the other folks were very active in that effort. Next slide simply shows this does not include fringe costs, but the only purpose of this slide is to show you that since 2011, the blue bars, general downward trend of in our budget, and that's going to be going down further. Even with very modest inflation, costs do go up over the ensuing period, and we're trying to cover the same activities with less cost. Bottom line is we've crossed the breaking point, and we're clearly doing less with less now, as opposed to trying to do more with less, which is what we had been able to sustain right up until a few years ago. And it's not unique to us. I think Doug works for Parks. They're under similar pressures. It's really throughout our entire agency that we're experiencing this. The next slide, general fund monies to BNR. This talks about the monies that come to our Bureau through the general fund. We've touched on this already. All of our sportsman licenses, permits, and sales go into the general fund. We get all of that money back. That's the blue portion of this graph. And then the two exploded portions are the portions that we've talked about previously, where they're above and beyond what sportsmen put into the general fund, but what comes to support BNR programs. The bottom line out of this graph is that roughly what we're getting from the general fund is roughly 50% sportsman supported. So that's kind of the way a lot of people, as we've said, believe that they're getting hosed, as I think was the term, and where in fact we get twice as much from the general fund as you folks put in. So that's kind of the key point from that slide. The next slide talks about our inland fisheries expenditures. Used to be Inland Fisheries Division. Now these are the inland fisheries expenditures as part of the overall fisheries division. And that's the whole point of that is simply to show you how those expenditures are divided up, particularly between our fish culture part of our program and all the rest of our program, which includes habitat, fish management, diadromous or migratory fish management, etc. So what you're looking at there is in the inland program, it is more than half of our expenditures are on fish culture. Also, the gray slice that you see down towards the bottom where you see Kensington at $518,000 in 2015. Remember, that's 2015. For 2016, and I'll get into it in a minute, that number is reduced by well over $200,000 due to the cuts that had to be implemented between 2015 and 2016. Quinnebog, as all of you know, is by far our biggest facility. We spend almost $2 million per year there raising trout. Overall, it raises somewhere between 65 and 70% of our total trout production. It's a facility that's going to be undergoing a facelift over the next couple of years. I don't know, Pete, if you want to take a second and just tell people what's going on at Quinnebog.
Yeah, well, it's been a battle to get the project moving, but we had dedicated bond money to do an energy upgrade. It's essentially going to, in addition to saving a lot of money through reduced energy costs, it's going to be able to allow us to modernize the facility. It was designed to pump 5,000 gallons a minute. That's instantaneous flow, 24/7. Every day of the year. Over time, for a variety of reasons, we have a series of wells in bedrock and gravel, 14 wells in total. Don't use them all the time, but wells don't, they deteriorate, and even when you, there's a process called rejuvenation or cleaning, never brings them back 100%. We're sitting on a tremendous aquifer there, the water is there, it's just hard to get out. Got some iron and manganese, magnesium issues as well, but the point I was gonna make is that our flow rates through the hatchery are at historic lows right now. That's affecting us because we need to recirculate water. When you do that, there's a threat to, getting pathogens introduced, and you're reusing water that's already gone through a series of ponds. I don't know if folks have been there. Our outside production ponds, we've got 40 of them. They're 50-foot diameter. We raise a tremendous amount of fish. So, and they're protected with netting to keep predatory birds out. We did have, but still, there's a concern. So when we're pumping water back up to reuse it because we don't have enough water, we're really operating with some risk. And as part of this energy project, we are able to, the project's in design now with a professional consultant, but we're going to be getting, modernized filtration and disinfection of that water that's used in the recirculation system. What it's going to allow us to do is have, hopefully, better looking trout. I'm not sure we're going to have more trout. They might be a little bit bigger, but we're going to greatly minimize the risk that we operate. And I know a lot of you have been at our hatcheries for various reasons, with trout in the classroom and other things. It's a really, really tough business to be in. It's, I don't know that I could do it. We have staff that they live on site, and when the power goes out at 2 in the morning, they're there to keep the things going. In fact, the Connecticut River Salmon Association last weekend at their dinner on Saturday night awarded a President's Award to Al Sonsky. Al, as I think you know, retired from Kensington Hatchery last summer. And, for his efforts, they wanted to award him, and, we had a great time. But Bill made the mistake of tossing an easy thing over to me, and I started talking, much like Jim. And I need to be reined in, so I'll give it back to you.
So the bottom line of this project that's undergoing at Quinnebog, and we've been many years awaiting this, is it's going to increase the energy efficiency of the facility, save us hundreds of thousands of dollars per year in energy costs. It's going to put a recirculation system in place that's going to allow us to grow healthier fish and better quality fish, and more fish than we currently can, to get back to closer to the numbers we were producing a few years ago.
I remember what I didn't talk about. We're going to have a temporary reduction in the number of fish that are being produced over a series of years. Part of that now, it's already started, unfortunately, and that's actually due to another maintenance project that's going on. The way those ponds work, you have sumps on the side, and they're, the place was built in the early 70s. Concrete doesn't last forever. So right now, out of those 50-foot production ponds, 5 of them are dry because we had, you're raising fish year-round, but when you have to repair these sumps that are adjacent to the ponds, you can't have water in the pond. So right there, that limited our production by some, and a lot of our staff in fish management over the last week, we've been crunching numbers and trying to figure out how to best address, providing great fishing this year, but maybe being a little smarter in how we allocate the fish to different waters. So a lot of brain power is going into it. We don't always agree on all the decisions, but a lot of people are putting some serious thought into it. And because the fact is, compared to the last few years, we will be stocking fewer catchable sized trout this year and for a few years beyond. And part of that was the reduction at Kensington that we alluded to. We had to cut production there. Savings come in reduced feed costs and reduced electrical costs. Because like Quinnebog, which is entirely a groundwater facility driven by pumps, Kensington is the same way. Burlington's a little different operation. It's not as reliable because you got to rely on Mother Nature a lot more, and she hasn't been really kind to us lately with the drought and other things and really hot water or higher water temperatures. So That's what we've got going in the 3 hatchery system.
Excellent. Okay, so next slide.
Yeah.
Next slide talks, so we explained we've got a $24 million overall budget if you include the fringe, which is actually part of the comptroller's budget. Between 2015 and 2016, you'll remember there was a significant budget crisis in place, very similar in scale to the budget crisis that's for the upcoming fiscal year. The overall budget deficit for the state was around 1.5 billion. That deficit had to be parsed out amongst the various agencies to be able to come back to a statewide balanced budget. And within agencies, our agency took about a $10 million cut. Within our agency, the share that was divvied out to the Bureau of Natural Resources was $800,000 that we had to come up with in cuts between 2015 and 2016, and what you have in front of you shows you what we did.
Are you gonna have to do that again this year for 2017, since we're talking about?
We don't know yet. We'll know more after the governor's budget address on the 8th of February. And then what we really end up having to do will then be handed over to the Appropriations Committee in the legislature and then to the full legislature to iron out a budget. And that is the product that will determine what we need to do for the subsequent fiscal year. What we did in going from last fiscal year into this current fiscal year, as the legislative session worked on, we got an idea of where we were going to have to go with cuts, and we started building contingency plans, because by the time when the legislative session ends and a budget is signed to when the next fiscal year begins is wafer thin. So we had to be in prepared, and that's a similar exercise that we're going to be going through in the ensuing months leading up to the beginning of the next fiscal year, which is July 1st. So yes, the fact is we had a $1.5 billion deficit that we had to deal with last year. We're looking at a $1.5 billion plus deficit again for this coming year statewide. And because you've already made multiple years of budget cuts, there's less places and less capacity to absorb cuts. All of us have, can appreciate how that works. But, so this is what we did in 2016. And you can look through the details, came out to $800,000. Obviously, we eliminated, you'll see them scattered through those items. We eliminated a lot of seasonal positions that we normally hire. A total of 19 were cut. 19 position equivalents were cut within the Bureau of Natural Resources. When I say position equivalents, seasonals are hired. The position is, they're paid a modest hourly rate, $11, $12, $13 an hour, and they're hired for 35 hours a week, roughly for 35 hours a week for 6 months. And we had to eliminate the equivalent of 19 of those positions. In some cases, we eliminated positions outright. In other cases, we made them, reduced them to 3-month or 4-month positions. The objective was to meet the budgetary targets. Pete already mentioned the cuts, the first item, the $119,000 in cuts at Kensington and Quinnebog Hatchery that were made partially by eliminating seasonals, partially by reducing our production capacity at Kensington, eliminating some programs and thereby saving food and electrical costs. That one was not something we would have chosen on our own, but we also had lost 2 maintainers positions the year before, and had the fish hatchery supervisor retire this past year as well, and we aren't able to replace positions that are lost. So not only did we have to make up savings, but we simply didn't have the staffing capacity to run it commensurate with how we ran it in previous years. So that's the first item, and I'm not going to go through these line by line. I think you can see that we were trying to save money in ways that would allow us the minimal impact to our programs and the minimal impact to our constituencies. Our job, as we see it, is whatever resources we have, is to do the best possible job in conserving the environment and providing for our constituents, hunters, anglers, and others who enjoy the outdoors. So whenever we're faced with having to make budget cuts, we make them in a manner that is the least damaging as possible, and we will get a little bit creative. One of the items you'll see here, and we'll use any resources that we have at our disposal or we can get hold of. You'll see an item down here, change state lands forestry staff time, charge state lands forestry staff time to RGGI funds. That's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and there's 175,000. What we did was we were able to get access to some of the money that's taken in through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, where they basically exchange credits on market, and there's money that comes into a pool that's divvied back to the states. And our argument was that forestry, and properly managed and healthily managed forestry, is a carbon sink. It should qualify for being considered an expense that can be paid for out of and charged to this funding source. And we were able to get approval by our commissioner and others for access to this level of funding. And if need be, we'll try to get more of that in subsequent years to prevent having to make cuts to whether they're forestry programs or fisheries programs, whatever. In addition to these cuts totaling 800,000, we had lost six positions with people either retiring or leaving over the course of 2016. So that's in addition to the 800,000, and those are positions that we can't refill. The savings achieved by those vacancies, those positions becoming vacant, were savings that the overall agency used to count off the top of the 10 million that it had to cut off its budget. So any vacancies that appear, the agency as a whole uses those and applies them towards the necessary cost savings, and it's the remainder after those vacancies that is then allocated out to the different bureaus and operating units to address. One of the, and you can see at the very bottom, the last bit of text describes the positions that we lost in 2016, what we expect to lose in 2017, probably 5 more or so retirements. Overall, our staffing levels are down since 2012. That's just the number that I've calculated out. We're down, wildlife, we're down 18% in staffing. Inland fisheries down 21%. Forestry down 27%, and marine fisheries down 38% in staffing. So with that, think of inland fisheries down 21%, marine fisheries down 38%. That brings us to the last action item that we had to do in 2016 that Pete spoke to earlier, I mentioned as well, and that's simply that we could not sustain inland fisheries and marine fisheries as separate entities and separate divisions. In order to accomplish the highest priority tasks in each, in particular, to get the absolute necessary tasks done in marine fisheries, since they've suffered a 38% loss in staffing and the loss of their director, we had to merge those divisions. We no longer have a director of marine fisheries.
You can't replace it.
We can't replace them. We were able to hire an assistant director for marine fisheries who will report to Pete and handle a lot of the very contentious issues that have to do with quota allocations of recreational and commercial fish along the northeast coast. I say we can't replace them, but we're still trying we still will try to get a low-level replacement for that one position. That's one thing that we're still attempting to do. We're not going to be able to replace him as a director. We elevated somebody else to that position, to an assistant director position, but we're trying to argue for at least an entry-level staff to help build for the future.
How do they expect these agencies to run efficiently without people there to properly manage
Can I
them?
put that on the list to answer at the end?
I'm going to answer
ahead,
that
I'm sorry,
right.
I'm sorry.
But I am going to answer that now because it was asked, and it's a very good question. The truth is, they aren't thinking that far ahead, and I don't think we should be so critical for them of not thinking far ahead. At this point in time, they've got to solve a $1.5 billion deficit.
Okay.
And they're relying on us to do so in the absolute best and least harmful way to the citizenry, and then, you know, at the same time, as you know, they assume that things will turn around, get better at some point, we'll be able to build for the future. But I don't think at this point that trying to sustain functions is the highest order of business.
Fair enough.
That's our job to try to do that as
I got
best as
it.
possible. If we're faced, the question was asked earlier, if we're faced with cuts of similar magnitude in 2018, what are we going to do? You know, we don't have that figured out yet. One of the things that we will do, I'll assure you, is again, try to reach creatively into funding sources like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative where we can to minimize the impacts of cuts. And also, you know, we do have these federal funds. There are federal funds that we can move around, adjust, and get some savings that way. We might have to change some of what we do to match the funding sources and the constraints placed therein somewhat. But we'll try to be as creative as possible with whatever funding sources we have at our disposal. So next slide. And this is the last slide that I'm going to talk about. And this is simply the age distribution of our anglers. I really didn't even need this slide. All somebody had to do was look around the room. And I'm very much included as part of that description.
Yeah, sure you are.
Oh, I am. I'm north of 60, approaching 65. So this is the age distribution of our licensed anglers in 2015. I've seen 2016 chart. It looks the same, maybe a little bit more so. You'll note that there's an awful lot of people that are north of age 65 that are fishing, that currently get a free license. But more importantly, you'll notice a massive amount of people, really the largest bulk of people is in that, you know, 50, 55, approaching 60 age group. And that's a concern. It's a concern for a variety of reasons as you look 5, 10, 15 years down in the future relative to what's going to sustain our support. And it is this chart, and Pete and myself and others looking at this chart, that has really driven home the need for us to invest in, and it's been mentioned around here, invest in trying to recruit, retain, and reactivate anglers, it's called R3, throughout the system to get as many people at all different ages, particularly young people, particularly groups that haven't been, may not be as well represented amongst the angling community, such as inner city folks, Hispanics, etc. Get as many of these groups as possible out on the water and fishing. And we have a number of reasons for wanting to do so. Anglers and hunters, through this purchase of licenses, through this purchase of fishing tackle, are really the driving force in supporting conservation, whether it's cold water fish conservation or wildlife conservation or forestry programs. They're the primary people that have a connection with the resource and support that resource with their contributions. They're also the people that provide, in numbers, the political force that's and sway public opinion to the extent necessary to maintain and conserve those resources. So those two reasons, plus they do provide the dollars that enable us to operate and to do the work that conservation work and recreation related work that they would like to see us do. So for those reasons, Pete and I, and certainly Pete's got a lot of his staff working on it much harder than we are, at trying to develop effective R3 programs to get more young folks in amongst the angling community. And I think that's going to be critical to our future going forward. And quite frankly, it's something that we as a state agency are invested in. It's something that we need to do. But it really is a job for more than just us. It is a job for Trout Unlimited as well. It is a job for the Connecticut Bass Federation Nation. It is a job for any organization that has an interest in conservation and outdoor recreation. So with that, That's the presentation. I think, Alicia, it's pretty much the same presentation I gave at the FAC with a little bit additional thrown in. And if anybody has written down any questions, I think we'll do our best to try to answer them.
I'd like to make a quick proposal. I have us at the end of the agenda being out here at 9:05, but out of respect for everyone's time, I'd like to propose that we extend the question period for about 15 minutes. That'll get us out of here at 9:20. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah?
And I do have to point out, I'm down here for, I think, for 55 minutes, and then it's 52.
Can you just give us an idea while we're still on this last slide of the revenue losses you would expect once this bulge here in your distribution chart moves across the navy blue line?
I can answer that.
That's
When
why
I'm
it's
old
on-
enough to finally get a free license, I'm gonna have to pay for it. That's what's gonna happen.
That's why it's only an annual thing.
Maybe I shouldn't have let him answer. No, the truth is, I mean, we're looking at, yeah, I mean, we're looking realistically at a, 25, 30% reduction in participation in revenue. And I am very sincere that what concerns me most about that is participation. Revenue is important too. They're both important parts of the solution. They're both very important parts of the equation, but participation is what's most concerning. And I think we're clearly looking at dropping another 20, 30%. The number of inland licensed anglers that we have right now is around 150,000, maybe slightly less than that. We were at our peak in 1992, 93. We were around 225 to 230,000. So that's how far we've dropped off since. And so we're looking at significant decay going forward if we don't see some kind of change.
Thanks.
Was that decrease, did that coincide with the increase in state fees, the doubling of the fishing license?
There was a drop-off when the fishing licenses were doubled. You'll recall that doubling was pulled back, and it was closer to a 25% increase when it came out. But every license increase that we make, there is a drop-off. But if the license fee increase is relatively modest and appropriate, within a year or two, it bounces back. So yeah, license fee increases we've got to be very careful with because they do have an impact on participation. And where you can look no further than wildlife and hunting to see that. Right now, hunting in this state, it's not the license cost, but if you look at the permits, the tags, the stamps, the fees, and the other requirements to be an active hunter in Connecticut, they're high enough so that elasticity is gone. All the casual hunters, most of them, have departed the sport, and you're left with the core. And that core is a lot smaller at 45,000 hunters today than the 130,000 hunters that we had 20 years ago. And that we don't want to see the same thing happen to fishing.
We lost a lot of that habitat too.
Yeah, habitat and access makes a big difference as well, particularly for hunting, but also on the fishing side, access to streams.
Do you know how many veterans you have licenses?
Do we have any veterans?
No, do you know how many veterans, military?
Opposed free licenses. It's not a big chunk of money, and it's on an individual basis, but it's a large chunk of money collectively, depending upon how the bill is written.
We haven't discussed that with you. I would love to see.
I had a feeling we weren't going to agree.
Bill, where does the trout stamp stand?
Trout stamp stands in regulation form, and Pete can probably address that a little better than I can at this point.
We hope to get that out the door to the Office of Policy and Management within the next 2 weeks or so. Let's see. So we've vetted this with the Fisheries Advisory Council at the last 2 meetings. The organization meets quarterly. I'm sure you've heard reports from Alicia about what occurs there. So we floated some ideas at the September meeting, made some adjustments going into the December meeting. And I can maybe recall a couple of those things we were thinking about. Originally, we came in with just a combined salmonid stamp. We got a lot of feedback in September that, no, you should have a separate trout stamp and a salmon stamp. So oddly enough, the salmon stamp would apply to our broodstock salmon for fishing them in the lakes where they occur, as well as the 2 sections on the Naugatuck River, 1 section, and then the Chautauqua River, and waters downstream where you can legally fish in the season. So all trout and kokanee salmon would, even though they're a salmon, would be considered under the trout stamp option. We brought that back to the December meeting. There was some discussion about the price points on that. We had a difference or a differential between a non-resident trout stamp fee or salmonid stamp fee and a non-resident one. What we got or heard pretty loudly and clearly was, why don't you just, since non-residents currently pay so much more for a fishing license, maybe the stamp proposal, you should just equalize it. We also came in with the understanding, or at least preference, from those of us internally in the agency that vetted it. We have, and I didn't bring any of this tonight, but we have pricing data from all the other northeastern states. So we know what they charge. You know, New Hampshire, we always thought was a place you could do a lot of things cheaply. They're actually the highest in the Northeast right now. They had a major increase recently. Most of the northern states don't have salmonid or trout stamps. It's typically states at our latitude and south. So Rhode Island has a stamp option, Pennsylvania does, I think New Jersey does, and then every state south of there. The Northeast region, the way we're organized, runs from Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and up here. Doesn't go in Pennsylvania, New York, doesn't go west to Ohio or some of these other states. So that's the universe we're looking at. So we wanted to maintain the price for a resident annual fishing license and stamp so that it would not exceed $40. So I thought I brought this handout with me, but I actually threw the wrong thing in my file. So if I can log back on here, I can give you the price point. What I believe it is a trout stamp would be, and Bill's going to correct me when I get the numbers wrong. I think the stamp is for trout is $5 or $7.
Yep.
It's $7.
If you say so.
We've heard that it was $12 for both.
12 bucks for, I thought it was 5, 10, 12 for both.
Yeah, but we were looking at a
5 for trout, 10 for salmon, 12 for both.
the salmon was 10, but then there was a discount if you buy like the combo for both of them. So I think, no, it was 510. The combo is 12, that's what it is. We figured it out. So that's the proposal on the floor now. So as far as the regs process goes, and I'm sure there's people in the room I've talked to before and talked about other regs that are in the same package. Every time I have a conversation with folks about when are the regs going to take effect, I should learn better and never promise anything because it always takes longer than we think. So we will have, for instance, the Mill River. There's nobody here from Nutmeg Chapter tonight, right? I know my answer. So the Mill River reg change is going to be in the same package with the trout stamp and several other things. The point being is anything that's adopted through this our preference and understanding is that it would take effect for 2018. It's not going to happen further. I thought some of these other regs would get rolled out quicker, but it didn't happen. And then when there was, consideration of moving forward with the trout stamp, it's like, okay, let's not do these separately because it's increased administrative time. We have to hold hearings, they're usually at night. We just said, we're going to hold up some of the other regulations and then get the trout stamp piece rolled into it. So it's going to move forward. They'll be heavily notified, advertised, and I'm sure no one in this room would have a problem knowing when the hearing is going to be held, and you can provide oral comment on it in favor, you can, in opposition, whatever you want to do, and there'll be an opportunity for written comment like there always is with any of our regulations.
And I really want to stress, because you're going to hear a lot of people grumbling about this, is if once this comes out, it's said and done, encourage people to send letters, give their constructive opinion of what they think should happen, and be able to provide that input to DEP, because that's what they're seeking during this public portion of the process.
So, I apologize for not bringing the handout because there's some other little nitty-gritty details. To actually harvest and retain a trout or salmon anywhere in the state where you would otherwise need a license, public waters, not your club pond or anything like that, you would need the stamp. But then in special management areas under our proposal, even if you're catch and release fishing, which I know many of you do, exclusively or a lot, our proposal would require the stamp on those special management waters also. Trout parks, trout management lakes, TMAs, and even wild trout management areas, many of which we don't stock at all. So that's what the proposal is, and once that is publicly available, we'll make sure that it is. So again, what we kicked around at FAC.
65 plus, do we pay the fee or not? Or is it, you have a free marine license, you have a free tax?
Very similar to hunting, you if over 65, you get the license free, but you still have to pay your stamps and tags and stuff like that. So yeah, you would need a stamp.
That would be anyone required to hold a license would, in essence, have to get the stamp under our proposal. So the only discount would be for the 16 and 17-year-olds who are all trying to recruit and get active in fishing. This goes back a few years where, it was great that the legislature was able to pull this off when they, and I forget the Public Act number at this point, but when all hunting and fishing fees, there was a hunting wrinkle, but let's say fishing fees were cut in half. So that would be the same thing for any stamp. That's already on the books. So it'd be 50% of the regular normal cost for 16 and 17-year-olds.
So that reduction happened in 2013, I believe. By 2015, we had the reduced fees in place. I might be off by a year, but bottom line is we saw a doubling in the number of 16 and 17-year-olds with license, presumably as a result of those fees being halved. So that's a very...
Right, so the way we sold this is, where are you an adult when you're 16? Only maybe in other states too, but in the state of Connecticut, you have to buy your fishing license, your hunting license, and it's full price. You can't buy alcohol, you can't buy cigarettes, you can't join the military at those ages. So it's like, why would you pay full price? So it went through, and that was great. So it was part of the recruitment, actually retention tool, part of the 3 R's that Bill had mentioned. So I'd like to thank everybody here that I know has individually or as part of your chapter actually put on events, gone to Hunting and Fishing Appreciation Day, participated in Family Fishing Day, done your own things on your own or with our care program. And I know there's folks in the room that are care volunteers and all of that. So we hope you all want to keep it up, and we've got a couple things coming up in the near future. Family Fishing Day, Free Fishing Day is the same weekend it always is in May.
Saturday, May 13th.
You've already got the date?
I already got the date. Confirmed with Mike that the truck's gonna be there already.
Okay, good.
I scheduled our stocking truck.
Yeah, no, good. So, and I know I don't know if it's been announced yet formally, but I believe our Family Fishing Day, No Child Left Inside event will be at Chatfield College.
Right. Yep.
So you guys are on board with that?
We're on board.
Fantastic.
Forward to it. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
What is the thought process behind having the stamp even on catch and release waters and waters that aren't stocked? Just,
The thought process is driven by the fact that while, that's where we invest tons of staff time. That's where we have to monitor the populations on these wild trout areas on an annual basis. That's where we go into and monitor the TMAs on a nearly annual basis. That's where if we have to conduct creel surveys, we do it because they're the most heavily fished waters. Even though it's catch and release, that's where our big staff investment is.
well, I'm gonna bring that back to my chapter, that's why I asked the question.
So I do,
Wait, we have time
How
for
much time
only
do we
one
have?
more question.
This is, my question requires a number as an answer. 150,000
then
people
that's
are
it.
buying licenses, how many are not buying licenses and should?
All the rest.
Yeah, all the rest.
That's a great answer.
No, no, I don't know.
That's not the point of your question, but it's a great answer. So
We could be
we
around
don't know. We've done a lot of creel surveys where we do encounter people who don't have licenses. In some of our surveys, it's run as high as 1 out of every 8 or 9 or 10 people we encounter late in the season doesn't have a license in the fall. We don't really know how many are out there. Generally, when somebody without a license sees somebody coming with a DEP shirt on, they're gone. So there is a significant portion of it. Certainly compliance has gotten worse over the years as enforcement has gone down
Right.
and as costs have gone up.
yep,
Thank you.
And this is the last question,
Okay.
because we have to get on with business.
no problem.
Pardon me.
So you're gonna go forward with the salmon stamp?
It's gonna be in the regs package, provided that we get approval from others
Okay,
to
So it's-
run with that.
so this is sort of like a two-part question.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go forward with a salmon stamp, that means the Kensington hatchery is safe?
That's what we're trying to,
Right,
that's the message.
right, that's the message.
That's the message. It's an important part of that. We're trying, that revenue enhancement is intended to do two things. One, when we look to enhance revenue, we're hoping, can't be certain, we're hoping to offset
Right.
cuts. But two, we needed a message regarding the hatchery system, which had been repeatedly in the hit
Attacked.
list.
Right, because salmon basically raised in Kensington, that salmon only exists, they don't exist anywhere else in the world. That salmon has basically, adapted to the Connecticut River warm waters. So if they close the Kensington hatchery, salmon go away, that's it. They're done. They're never coming back. Like the sea-for-all and browns.
That's a point that NOAA made when the
Right.
salmon restoration ended. NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, urged us to try to maintain that genetic line for as long as possible
Yep.
because they were convinced that adaptations had developed and
Sure.
had become part of the genetics of that
Yep.
strain, if you will.
There'd be hurdles
Thank you.
as well, because the only other Atlantic salmon in New England now are endangered. They're
Right.
federally endangered, so there's no other hatchery product that we could use, so.
Okay.
The sea-for-ellens was an unfortunate situation, but I don't know if folks here are aware of it or not. We sent 100,000 eggs to the state of Maine, and they're gonna be raising them in 3 different hatcheries. They trusted us, even though there were other sea-for-ellen sources out there, and we've been sending them some eggs for years because they've been testing them. They like the way they perform. So our agreement with the state of Maine is when we're able to, return to normal hatchery production, we would like to get our
back.
sea-for-ellen strain, or it's gonna take a few years, but we would like to get that going again. And that's why we had to make a tough choice.
Sure.
We couldn't get rid of the salmon and expect them back at some point.
Right.
And we couldn't continue to maintain 2 brood lines at that facility. So
Okay.
that's what we had to do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill and Pete.